So welcome back to Wisley's Walks, episode 3, and we're going to be mapping intensity. So what do I mean by intensity? Well, in this context, it's to improve the contrast between areas of the map and to bring focus to particular places or aspects of the data. Here's a large-scale view of the waypoints from Wisley's 730 walks. Firstly, we're going to create a heat map from the original waypoints of the GPS data to look at Wisley's territory. Creating a heat map or an interpolation is simply a case of changing the symbology renderer. So we've gone from single symbol to the heat map renderer. And here's the default output. But as with a lot of defaults, they're merely used as a starting point. The colours, the breaks and the detail isn't to my specific liking to what I wanted to show. So I changed the search radius to make it a little bit larger. It gives me a more generalised interpolation, and I'm going to use Inferno as the colour scheme, which works much better with the dark background, with lighter areas seen as representing more. Once the lines of the walks are switched back on, the heat map acts as a focus to the central territory he walks more frequently. But the colours are a bit shouty. Let's add some more of that transparency goodness to knock it back a bit. And again, you don't always want defaults. 60% transparency makes the heat map component sit much better as a backdrop to the lines rather than saturating them. But heat maps can be vague, and interpolating where Wisley walks to the whole area isn't actually mapping the truth. He walked on paths and pavements, and the heat map renderer includes private land and property which he never set a paw on. We use another tool to focus more on the density of the linear paths he actually took. Here, the line density tool has been used to create a heat map which is more closely constrained to the linear features. It takes the line features as input as opposed to the point features for the normal heat map, and it doesn't interpolate the in-between areas. It's faithful to the linear network itself. And the result is a linear heat map which genuinely adds focus to the lines of most use and not the overall or the in-between areas. But we've made both heat maps, so why not use both? I've already set the area heat map to 60% transparency, but let's give the linear heat map a screen blend mode which will blend it with the layer beneath to create a subtle focus. It's also a quite attractive way to accentuate the otherwise single coloured lines. Many lines on maps indicate flow, direction and movement, and Wisley's walks are no different. We've already seen how line thickness can reflect more common routes, but let's explore alternative symbology to show different characteristics. Just to remind you, there are 740 polylines in the feature class, each single line represented by one symbol as they are here. But for the next set of maps, we're going to split each walk, each polyline, into multiple segments. Now there are a couple of ways to do this depending on what you want to subsequently do. I'm going to use an edit tool, specifically the divide tool. I select the line, I then divide each line into 300 feet, roughly 100 meter segments, and I chose this latter technique to create segments of equal length for each polyline. As you can see, the data looks the same, but now there's over 21,000 separate features. Each feature is attributed with the data from its original polyline, but they all now have sequential IDs, which is actually going to be useful, as we'll see in episode 4. And as you can see, as I click on that original line that was edited, it's now not a single line, but a series of multiple individual segments. Of course, we could have used Wisley's original waypoints, and that would have allowed us to get a sense of his changing speed across a walk. But trust me, you don't need to watch him stop and sniff as regularly as we did. Let's just take a look at one walk. Here's the 7.4 kilometre walk he did one afternoon in February 2021. If we click on the lines, we can see each individual 100 metre segment. And now the line is split into segments, we can be more creative with the symbology. Here, for instance, are line segments with a gradient fill along the line. They add an impression of direction and movement to the symbology. How did we achieve this? Well, if we dive into the symbology pane for this feature class, you can see that it's basically a line symbol set with a fill, and we've applied a gradient fill to that line. By default, this gradient fill would be applied at the layer level with every single line filled at the angle specified, and that wouldn't create the desired effect of each line having its own gradient. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Firstly, I've allowed symbology property connections. Then if we look at the appearance, we've got a 3-point buffer which gives the line some thickness. On the layers, we have an enclosed polygon effect, and we have a pattern. Now crucially here, we can set the angle using attribute mapping. Now this is the clever bit, but it's so clever I didn't do it. I saw my good friend Tommy Farwell use it on a map he was making. It turns out he didn't do it either. In fact, Craig Williams wrote the code. And it's an arcade expression that generates the geometry of the start vertex of the line segment, then the same for the end, and then calculates the angle between the start and end, to give each segment its own angle for the gradient fill to be applied. It's a symbology override. We can add to the symbology too, maybe with an arrowhead to emphasise direction of travel. And that's just a shape marker layer added to line symbology. It's the same yellow as the opaque end of the tapered line so that they match. And the marker placement is at the extremities, with one per part, at an angle to the line, and placed at the end of the line. But we could go one symbol further, I feel. We could actually put Wisley on his own map. Here he is running along the walks in a clockwise direction. And there's actually two layers, with one Wisley facing right and one facing left. And it's just a picture marker layer with the same settings as we used for the arrowheads. And that's it for adding intensity to the symbology of Wisley's walk.